Hello, everyone, and thank you for tuning in. So, I hope you are having a good day. And if you are not, then I really hope that after this talk, you will have a good day. So, for those who don't know Brock, then I'm just going to make a quick a quick introduction. So, he's a chief architect at Nascent, and he's also an MVP developing the Foundry tool. And as you may know, for those who've been here for a long time, he's been dropping alpha here at Spearbit for a long time, since the very beginning. Spencer already mentioned the administrative note. If you have questions, please go ahead, drop them in Q&As, and Brock will probably go over them at the end of the presentation. And yeah, that's for now. So Brock, the floor is yours.
Thanks. Hello, everyone, and thanks for coming to hear me talk a little bit about this simple security toolkit that myself and a few of us at Nascent put together. Nascent is an early stage investor in various crypto projects, whether it's a startup or an existing early stage protocol. We have myself, Dan Elitzer, and former Open Zeppelin auditor Austin Williams. The three of us were the primary contributors to this this toolkit, and it came about from us working with our portfolio companies and having been through a number of different scenarios from starting a project from scratch all the way to launched, and then incidents and being in war rooms, and just trying to help our portfolio companies manage those situations. And we found that in general, I'll give the motivation. Let me go ahead and share my screen, just sort of the repo. Let's see. Go live. Okay, can you see the...
We got you, and also your audio may be cutting in and out. So,
okay, let me see if I can do something. If it keeps cutting in and out, can someone tell me in the Q&A?
Yep.
Okay, great.
The site is working great.
Okay, great. So that was kind of the motivation behind the Simple Security Toolkit. Is we'd been working with our portcos and had internally started to develop like these processes. And one of the issues we've seen with existing checklists and blog posts and those sorts of things from other auditing firms is they are verbose and not necessarily like a checklist, right? And there's cases for each. But we really felt that, all right, a lot of teams just need a checklist of yes, 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 I did this, I did this, I did this. And so it was really about making it as practical as possible for people who are developing smart contracts. And so it originally started with the audit readiness checklist, which was really because we've seen many portfolio companies and other teams that just it's not a connection. Okay, great. Glad to hear that mic is working well. So it really came from the audit readiness checklist, and then we expanded it out to the development process, the pre-launch checklist, and the incident response plan. And I'll just kind of walk through some of these and give a sense of what we were aiming for with each of them. And if any of you guys are going to implement, I encourage you guys to implement a lot of this, but kind of one step higher up is if you look at like an airplane, when things go bad, you have checklists, and even before they go bad, you have checklists, pre-flight checklists, and so and it's concrete checklists. So yes, there are books and things you can read about flying a plane, but when you're actually in there, you don't have time for all of that. And so making a simple, practical list we found is very helpful, and teams have been very responsive to it. So if you are a developer yourself, or if you are an auditor, feel free to share this around with teams you are going to be auditing, especially the pre-audit checklist, because it'll make your job a heck of a lot easier. So let's just jump in. The first part is the development process. So this comes from my own personal biases around what a good development process looks like. And most of the things in here you should view sort of as a template. You can take it and modify it however you want. But we kind of viewed this from, okay, either you're starting from scratch and you have nothing, or we wanted to make it flexible for you have an existing system and you're adding to it, upgrading it in some way. And so kind of the thought process, this is sort of a waterfall flow. So, the development team receives a feature request, and that could be the founder just saying like, hey, I think this is what we should be building, or it's someone in the team saying, hey, we need to add this to our system. Then a specification, then there should be time for evaluation. You should do an implementation, testing, then you deploy it and you monitor it afterwards. And so, there are plenty of articles that go into how to write a good specification, but ideally you make note of things like user input, how long do you expect this to take, do you take other protocols into account, do you have existing state based on other parts of your protocol, and kind of brought that all into a nice specification about what the feature is exactly supposed to do. This is important for when you are actually going to be evaluating, which is the next step, because I would say the evaluation is one of the least performed, but also one of the most important steps when you're developing. And so this evaluation phase, it looks at the specification and it evaluates whether or not, what's the overall complexity, how much time is it going to take, and then you should really, I label it just risks, but it's really kind of threat modeling. So you should take time to think about, okay, how does this feature affect various aspects of our other parts of our protocol, and think about how someone could try and step in and break it, and really put on the black hat mindset when you're approaching this evaluation phase, and that'll help you refine and evaluate. Okay, is this do we have a simple enough version, right? You can add complexity, but there's basically the saying, I would have made it simpler if I only had more time. So really, you should think about the specification and in this evaluation phase, whether or not it's simple enough to do what you want and not overly complex. I think our industry has a tendency to overcomplicate smart contracts, and the simpler the contract, generally the more secure it's going to be. And once you've done this sort of evaluation phase, then you, as a developer, you should move into the implementation phase. And so, again, this is all sort of a template, and you don't necessarily have to follow this step by step. I've received feedback where it's like, oh, I think it should be this and then this, or this and then this. And so I encourage everyone here, if you're a developer, to kind of make this your own, but I think some of the broad strokes here are important. So I like to draft a PR, include the feature request and specification, and anything from the evaluation that you feel is relevant. I like to step into initial implementation, so just getting a very basic attempt down, and start documenting things right away. And so I am not a huge fan of NatSpec, but for external/public functions, I think it's a good thing to have. I lean more towards inline documentation personally, just because I find that's better for when I'm trying to figure out what something does. The high level documentation like NatSpec is good, especially for saying this broad function should do X, Y, and Z. And the reason you want this good documentation is for your auditors. You want them to understand, okay, this is what this developer expects this to do, and this whole development process is supposed to set you up for secure contracts, and one of that is letting auditors be the best they can be. And then just some other things about, like, I really like this when you're doing. This is kind of taken from Rust. There's something called unsafe in Rust, and it's sort of similar to unchecked in Solidity. But I like to document. Okay, I am doing this plus. It literally cannot overflow because of this reason, or this multiplication can't overflow because of this reason. I like to document each operation as such with this safety tag. And every line of assembly should be documented as best as possible. Okay, great. Now you have an implementation. From there, I like to start with initial concrete tests. So that's unit tests. And one of the processes I really like to follow is, and I learned this from my YAM days. Each time you write to storage, you're walking through your implementation and you see a write to some storage variable. I like to write an explicit test that storage variable was changed as expected. And it doesn't necessarily have to be one storage write to one test, but a block of storage writes are tested. And if you're using Foundry, which I'm going to kind of assume you will be. I know Hardhat is still very popular, but Foundry is kind of my baby, and so I wrote this with a decent bias towards that. And so for non-state changing functions, good practice is just inherit the other contract. So you have your test contract, and if you inherit the internal non-state changing function, you can test math operations, that sort of thing. And after you write some concrete tests, you use coverage tools, make sure you're not missing anything major. And also make sure you write tests for each revert. This is just to making sure you're covering each flow. Then after you do some of your unit tests, you clean up the implementation based on the unit tests, if any bugs were found or anything. And then I like to run slither. So there are certain auditing firms that will not be named who basically just pretty print the output of slither. And so it is an exceptional tool. Mithril is also, or MithX, I don't know which one it's called, but is also a good tool. I like slither because you can do it locally. You don't have to send your code off to an external server, analyze the output, and if any bugs were. Hey, Hiccup HH3, can you mute? Getting static. Thank you. So after you run slither, I like to move into fuzz tests. In my Foundry talk, I really hammered home why fuzz tests are awesome. And whether that's Echidna or Foundry, either one are great tools. And when you move on to fuzz tests, you should be pretty confident in your implementation. In the happy path, the fuzz tests really start to, I say throw a monkey at it, which is basically randomize the inputs and try and see where your implementation breaks. The smarter the fuzzer gets, the more likely it is to find weird cases where your program doesn't do what you think it does. And a lot of times fuzz tests will surface bugs for you. I found a good number of bugs just because of fuzzes. And okay, now we've written fuzzes. Now we need to make sure that everything sort of works within the protocol. So, we're now considering the system as a whole. And so integration tests kind of, if you already have on-chain parts of your protocol, using a mainnet fork test to see how, okay, does replacing this module with this new module or adding this module change any aspects of your system. And mainnet tests can really help do that. And if you find any bugs, again, move back to step 4, clean up the implementation, and work your way through. Next, okay, now we're very confident that our program does what we think it does. So we're going to clean up the documentation. We're going to set up continuous. Is my mic okay? If not, let me know and I can try and fix. Mic good. Okay, cool. So set up CI, continuous integration via GitHub Action. So Foundry has a default toolkit for you. Slither has a really good one. And if you use Forge template, you get it out of the box. Hardhat has its own. That will help as you sort of make other changes. It's really good for integration tests, to have this continuous system for you. Next is the PR review. So there are a lot of small teams in this space. 1, 2 developers, and that can lead to sort of lazy PR reviews. But the implementer is the first line of defense. The reviewer really has, I think, an underappreciated job in our space. And you should probably have a system, and we may add this at a later point. But the reviewer should follow principles that are set out by the company itself. Okay, here's how we do our tests, here's how we write our tests, here's how we do our documentation, etc. And the reviewer should not only be looking, okay, did they follow the principles, but also check for basic vulnerabilities and that sort of thing. And again, Slither is your friend in this case. Additionally, reviewing documentation, making sure, okay, the implementer says this function should do this. Do they do that? And you should basically be auditing your code as you go along, as you build out a system with these PRs, and the reviewer should be the first auditor, not true audit, but peer review. And they should check common missteps as well. Great. So now you have you've written a great feature, and you've had one of your teammates review. Maybe you also add in, trying to get an external party to review. It's sometimes nice to have someone from who's not super familiar with your system take a peek at it. If you have developer friends that would be willing to help out there, that's always good. So then we move on to, okay, now we're thinking about deployment. So you're ready to deploy script. Foundry is on the precipice of releasing full revamping of our deployment system called scripting. You should write, again, an underappreciated aspect is writing a deployment test, making sure that everything is doing exactly what you think it's going to be doing upon deployment. And Foundry has this cool thing called record, which basically records every storage slot that was written to. And so I would recommend reading this and following this practice here, making sure that no slots were written to that were unexpected, and so then have an audit performed. So some projects features don't necessarily need an audit. I lean towards being safe rather than sorry, and so generally I pretty much always suggest people get an audit. If your system literally doesn't handle any money, then your mileage may vary there, but having complexity in code size inform who should audit your contracts is important as well. So we have an internal list of quality of auditors at Nascent who we think are really good and who we think take the slither output and make it pretty. And so as a developer, you should consider all the factors about your feature and your contracts as to who should do that audit. So then once you've completed an audit, you implement the fixes. And then another lacking aspect of the development process is setting up a monitoring service. So, you don't want to be Ronin, where it takes 6 days to realize $600 million were stolen. You're just putting yourself at an extreme disadvantage by not monitoring. And so you can use Check the Chain with Grafana if you want to build your own system, or you can use off-the-shelf monitoring like Tenderly or Defender Sentinels. And Forta is sort of the underlying. You can check out Forta as well. We'll likely add that in here, but Defender Sentinels uses Forta under the hood. And then you want to prepare / update your incident response plan, and we'll touch on what that looks like. But finally, deploy your contracts. If you follow this process, then you're most likely crushing other developer dev teams. And then you monitor for the next few hours. Make sure things run off without a hitch. And in the monitoring, you should have alerts and that sort of thing that ping you if anything weird happens. And be ready to take action. And finally, relax, have a beer. You earned it. And so that's kind of my thought process around how to develop. I think there are other ways to do it. This is what I found works well for me. And hopefully other people find value in that as well. And so I want to touch on a few other things in here. So the audit readiness checklist, I won't walk through each and every one of these. I want to kind of spend more time elsewhere, but there are some good tips in here that would help a team get the most out of their audit, and that's pretty much all this is. Simple things like running your code through a spell checker, just so that there's no confusion, and increases the level of professionalism in your code. And there's nice to haves as well, which are it will help the auditor if you do this, but isn't the be all end all. But bare minimum, people should be doing these things. Pre-launch security checklist. All right, another thing that I constantly see missed is putting a security contract email in your GitHub README. Samsung, takes a peek at your contract at 2 a.m. and finds a vulnerability in 5 minutes. He needs to know who to contact. If there's anything that is so low-hanging fruit, it's literally putting security at mycompany.com. Seriously do that. And listing addresses, there are plenty of protocols that don't list where you can find your contracts on mainnet. That in and of itself is super valuable for white hat hackers and people. The vast majority of people are good, and so surfacing surfacing things that make it easier for good people to find vulnerabilities is beneficial. Setting up a bug bounty program, I'm a big fan of ImmuneFi. In particular, you should. We're thinking about how to improve the thought process around how much should your bug bounty be. It depends on total value locked, in my opinion. If $100 million were at risk, you should really consider doing million plus, in my mind, for that bug bounty, because you need it to be a large enough incentive that a white hat doesn't turn black hat. And so a strong bug bounty is important. And also, I want to mention, prepare action scripts to pause contracts or take defensive actions. So in the case that you do have a vulnerability, which we'll touch on in the incident response plan, you'll have that stuff ready to go, and you'll have made it when you're not in a high pressure situation. And so offensive actions you can't really plan for, I would say, as much. Offensive, defensive, like white hat rescues, you can't plan for as much because the situation changes a lot. But simple pausing of contracts, you can craft those transactions well in advance of doing so. And then obviously creating an instant response plan. And so this, excuse me. So this is a template that we specifically designed for people to, fork and really make their own. The others, you definitely can make your own. This is one where it's like, okay, you take this and at your company, you implement this, and you only share it with people who need to be in the know. So there are a number of cases where internal parties were the ones that performed a hack, and this won't, not sharing this with the entire team, it won't necessarily save you from that situation, but it could help. And so again, if you have any feedback on this, feel free to open an issue or whatever. But sort of defining where you're going to have the war room take place, Discord, Zoom, Signal, whatever, and who is going to be in there. You want to limit this again because you don't know necessarily who your attacker is, and so you want to make sure that you define a set of people who you want in your war room, and if they're not on the list, then they likely shouldn't be admitted during the time, and so be conscious of that. The immediate steps, review the exploit transactions to identify the vulnerability. There's a couple tools here. Foundry has a replay, trace, and debugger. Tenderly debugger, ethtransaction.info, whatever. Those may all help. Once you identify, okay, this is what has happened with transactions, or even in parallel, pause your contracts, take other defensive action, and consider offensive action, i.e. white hat rescue. And again, you should define someone who is going to be in charge of this. Having been through war rooms, it can be an absolute mess. And so having some person predefined as you are in charge of this helps a lot. And that's kind of the backing behind all of this, is when tensions are running high, mistakes can happen. And so if you have one individual who is in charge of something, mistakes are less likely to happen. And so define the steps. Who needs to sign this multi-sig transaction to pause the contracts? Who is going to be writing the offensive action? Who is going to be taking other defensive actions? Additionally, once you've defined all that and you're ready to hit submit on the transactions, you should have someone review. Ideally, not the person who created the transaction. If the person who created this transaction is also the exploiter, then they may purposefully botch the transactions. And so you need a second party to review the transactions, make sure that they are doing exactly what you think is going to happen. You don't want to be scrambling to figure this out on the fly. And so that's why you have the defensive action scripts already in advance, as we described in the pre-launch security checklist. Okay, so you've taken defensive action. You should review all contracts to identify knock-on vulnerabilities. Once you have an exploit, your system is no longer your system. It is a new system in general, where the invariants that you had thought you had may no longer exist. And so you should look at other contracts in your system to identify if those are affected by this weird state transition in another contract. And then it's all about messaging. So updating the UI to reflect the current status, whether that's your contract's paused, etc. You should contact your security partners. Auditors will likely appreciate, or they will want to step in and try and help you, because they have an incentive to protect their reputation at the very least of, oh yes, we audited this, but there's still a vulnerability. We want to help you guys limit the damage here. Again, do not let anyone outside of your circle of trust into the war room. And then you want to post messages to your users in Discord. Update them regularly as new information and developments are there. But also, even if nothing new is there, updates will help keep people level-headed and can really help out the image of the protocol afterwards. But you want to make sure none of these messages reveal any sensitive information. So before pushing out a message, correspond with the people who are viewing the exploits and the transactions, and do not commit to a specific remediation before all facts are known. So don't say we're going to reimburse everyone for this hack before you know for a fact that is possible and what you're going to be doing. And don't say all funds are safe when in fact they are not safe. Post messages to users on Twitter following similar concepts as Discord. Once you have kind of gotten out of the immediate panic situation, draft and post a full public postmortem. Describe in detail kind of what happened to hopefully help others avoid this issue. And you should also prepare your patches for contracts and again, follow the development process. And then you should deploy the patch. And so that's kind of the incident response plan. I think many people in the industry have already started to pick this up. If you just look at the forks, there's probably 10 or so protocols that have forked this repo and have started implementing it. And so I think for me, each of these add their own value. And if you are a protocol dev, consider bringing this to your founder and say, hey, I think this would be a really good thing for us to implement. And whether that's just the incident response plan or the audit readiness checklist or whatever, hopefully this can be a good tool for people to use, and we can get safer contracts across the ecosystem. Okay, with that, I think I'll hop over to questions. What is the best way to do this? I can read through, or if someone has been looking at them, they can just fire them off to me. How many projects have you come across that do implement Slither and or Foundry CI GitHub Actions? So I would say a good number of Foundry repos actually do the Foundry CI because it's just so easy, and most templates have it out of the box. Slither CI I've not seen as common, but we are working at adding that directly into the Forge template, so that you'll get a review right there. Sorry, a output immediately with your other Foundry CI. I'm astonished the speaker actually recommends Slither. I thought people laughed at it. I would not say people laugh at it. I think it is an incredible tool. I'm curious if there are other tools that people do recommend. But I found, it has a high false positive rate, but it's worthwhile to wade through the false positives just in case that it rarely, I think, has a I don't know. I find it a good tool. Let's see. MyCompany.com is popular indeed. In my opinion, it should be 15% of total value locked, which is 5% higher than the usual. It really, in my opinion, depends. There are some protocols where it's just not viable to do even 10%. If you're at $5 billion of total value locked, it's hard to get up to the 10% mark. And so I think it's sort of a logarithm where it's if you are at 100 million plus, anything above a 3 to 5 million bug bounty, or anything between the 1 to 5 million bug bounty, is probably enough for a crypt vulnerability that would put that at risk. But obviously I'm a fan of larger bug bounties, but it is a business decision that protocols have to make, and they have to be liquid enough to do that full payout. Let's see.
CBYM had a human capital, and then also there was Grimpy Ninja had the how many projects do you come across that implement Slither and Foundry CI GitHub Actions? Maybe you want to take those two.
Sorry, what was the first one?
CBYM at 1231 asks, from a human capital perspective, how many security-related things can someone take care of before it comes too much? How many people should a project have taking care of this, i.e. security?
Yeah. How many security-related things can someone take care of before it comes too much? It's a hard question. I am very much a fan of the more eyes on a contract is a good thing. So what some auditor or some reviewer may find instantly, other auditors, it would take them a week to find. And each bug hunter, has their own thought processes that lead them to certain bugs sooner. And so in general, I think it really depends on the kind of vulnerability and who the auditor is. Yeah, I don't have a strong answer for that. How many people should a project have taken care of this? So this is in how many people should a project? I'm not exactly sure how to answer this. I think again, more eyes is better. That's not a great answer for a protocol that has capital constraints. But ideally, you should have. There should be a team effort to find security vulnerabilities, and so if you're able to get 2 people to review something before it goes to an audit, I think that's probably a good benchmark. And most people are able to get that done. Have you been in an incident response? Can you share your experience? Yes, I've probably been in 5 incident responses throughout my time. Let's see. Obviously, there's YAM, which was just a bug. I was in the Notional one a couple months back. That one was interesting. So they were audited by and formally verified by Certora, but they had a vacuous statement. I'm still a fan of formal verification, but there are some pitfalls that the technology is new enough that we haven't necessarily ironed out all of that stuff. And so I was also in Warp.finance a while back. That one was interesting. I would say in general, as well as the Fuse one that happened relatively recently. It varies from protocol to protocol what that experience is like. I think, and based on the contracts that the system has, and it's relatively a dynamic situation for the most part, but for the most part, the incident response plan that I have is built based on, okay, this is what I've done in the past, and this is what I've found works well. And so, but the difference between having the incident response plan and not is that the tensions run so much higher when you are trying to figure out what to do on the fly. And so I think that if you reduce the stress by having a plan, the better off the entire situation is. Contact security partners, is this some kind of agreement a project must have beforehand? Is it a paid agreement? So in general, no. I've been in some situations where the auditor doesn't want to help out, where it's the middle of the night and you're doing your own thing and the security partner isn't available. But I would say if they are not super willing to help, then it's going to reflect poorly on them. And most security auditors I've found are willing to kind of hop in if they're around. Separate question, how about Scribble? Have you tried it? I did, and they're struggling with implementing language features fully in the parser. One more SMT checker. So I've looked at Scribble. We've thought about how we might want to use it in Foundry if we want to do our own thing. That sort of from that perspective, I think it has some good things going for it. I've not personally tried it, but yeah, it'll be interesting to see how that evolves. It'd be nice to have. I think it would be great to be able to have something like Scribble. I don't know if Scribble is the right answer for like a recognized fuzzing language in a sense, and like invariant language. One more SMT checker. I have not actually used the SMT checker. I think this largely comes down to the documentation around it. It's like I don't quite know how to use it, and so improving the documentation there would probably be a good thing. What is the incident response action to take when a North Korean agent slides into your DMs? There's a Twitter thread about this a while back where a suspected North Korean agent tried to get hired at a company. So do background checks, I guess, is the answer, or try and figure out who the person is.
Maybe to rephrase that, Brock, would be like, what's the right type of like OPSEC or corporate security like kind of threat model that development teams should have, right, to prevent adversarial actors from like trying to penetrate their GitHub or something along those lines?
Yeah. Yeah, I think that largely falls. So there's a couple things to unpack there, right? So repo security, just making sure only people who can write to your repo are supposed to be able to write to your repo, and knowing and trusting those people, right? It's relatively you'll always have those kinds of people that are trying to get into organizations and DAOs, that are trying to do nefarious things. The best thing you can do is prevention. So, and good review process. That doesn't always help, but limiting who can push to master or main is important there. But in a non-first world of crypto, you do need some identifying information and making sure someone is who they say they are, and getting on a phone call with them and trying to figure out who they are as an individual and tease out their motives, I think is important if you're going to be a multi-billion-dollar total value locked protocol. And so I think I need to give more thought, and maybe we'll have a piece on this in the Simple Security Toolkit about like limiting who and just general OPSEC. I like the systematic process for War Room. Good insight. You mentioned using Grafana plus check the chain. Any open source dashboards you can configure Grafana to send alerts? So Grafana is, I would say, an open source dashboard. There are other ones, you could do Redash. I don't know about configuring Grafana to send alerts off the top of my head. You might check out, if you have a small dev team, just getting, Defender Sentinels up, because that will send you alerts and help out there. Hopefully that answers that. Would you be willing to share your favorite security tools for smart contracts? Yes, I think I mostly covered them. Foundry obviously is up there. Slither, mithril. My favorite decompiler is ethervm.io. They have a really good decompiler for when you're evaluating. Let's say you're someone needs a contract to hack your protocol. I generally lean on ethervm to put it into the opcodes into a more human readable form that is Solidity like. This is an optimization question. Okay, I don't think that's actually a question. Since we added custom field to NatSpec cases, for cases like Scribble, as you state, there may be other tools to accomplish the same. Do you think Foundry will experiment with this markup language for instrumenting the fuzzer? Yes, we've thought about that. We are. I personally am not a big fan of comments as code. I generally shy away from it, and if we can figure out a better way to do it inside of Solidity itself, we are more likely to do that. But we are open to all possibilities. We even, as a joke, considered, not legitimately, but we were joking around about making function names as a full Turing complete language, where you could say you could bound inputs and those sorts of things based on function inputs and input variable names. And if we didn't actually want to do this, but it was just a funny thought experiment about making a Turing complete language based on input names. Great. Well, if no one else has any more questions, I appreciate everyone coming and listening to me ramble for a while here. Hopefully you guys found some of this interesting, and if you guys have any thoughts on how to improve this repo, we want it to be sort of a public good where people can suggest things and provide feedback. We are relatively opinionated. We're not going to put everything in the kitchen sink in this. We want it to be actionable for users, and if you take that mindset when you are suggesting something, then I think we'll evolve this repo into be a great great resource going forward.
Cool. Thank you very much. So how can people contribute? Did they just open PRs and you folks review them?
Yeah, if you if it's a small thing, feel free to open a PR. Just adding a couple things to the audit readiness checklist or development process, whatever. Feel free to open a PR. If it's, hey, I think it would be really nice to have a broad OPSEC checklist, then maybe open an issue prior to putting in a bunch of work on that front, just so we can have a little bit of dialogue beforehand. Also, feel free to reach out to me on Twitter and DMs and ask, hey, is this something you guys would be interested in adding? Just so that we don't, bombard the PRs and you put in work and then I say, actually, no, let's not do that. Just get a little, save everyone some time.
Right. So any final remarks that you may have? And maybe a small but funny question that I have for you is Viper or Solidity?
So I am very much a Solidity guy myself. I don't really want to partake in the holy war that is Solidity versus Viper. I think Viper has some interesting things going for it. I'm not a fan of Python very much, but I've written a lot of it in my day. It'll be interesting to see how that evolves. And I know that team has been working on their compiler for a while. So, but yeah. So I'm yeah. I'm a Yule stan personally. Yule is my best friend. So
everybody should start coding in Yule. You heard that, folks?
No, please do not.
Thank you for your time. Thank you for all these insights. And people already know how to reach you. So yeah, I hope everybody has a wonderful week.
Yeah, thanks everyone.